The moment she leaned toward me, her breath warm with wine and laughter, her eyes unfocused but full of something dangerously close to longing, I knew that whatever I said next would change the direction of both our lives, and once the words left my mouth, there would be no going back. I hadn't planned to be her anchor that night. I had only agreed to come because she'd insisted, because she said she didn't want to go to the party alone, because I'd always been the safe one in her life. We'd known each other for years, long enough to develop that strange in-between space where feelings are obvious but never spoken out loud. She was the kind of person who filled rooms with energy, who laughed too loud when she was nervous and pretended she wasn't afraid of anything. I was the opposite, quiet, observant, always noticing the cracks people tried to hide. The party was loud, messy, full of half-finished conversations and too much alcohol. She drank more than usual, faster than usual. I noticed because I always noticed. Every time someone refilled her glass, something in my chest tightened. Not jealousy, fear. I had seen what alcohol did to people who were hurting but didn't know how to say it out loud. By the time we stepped outside into the cool night air, she was unsteady, leaning into me for balance, laughing at nothing. The streetlights blurred above us, and the city felt far away, like we were standing in a small pocket of quiet between decisions. She turned to me suddenly, too close, her hands gripping my jacket as if I were the only solid thing left in the world. Her smile faltered, softened, turned into something vulnerable. "I've wanted to do this for a long time," she whispered. Before I could respond, she leaned in, her lips barely an inch from mine. Every instinct screamed at me to close the distance. I had wanted her too, wanted her when she talked about her dreams, when she trusted me with her worst days, when she looked at me like she felt safest when I was near. But this wasn't the moment. This wasn't her choosing me. This was the alcohol talking louder than her truth. I gently held her shoulders and said the words that surprised even me. "Save that kiss for your clear head." She froze. Pulled back slightly. Confusion flickered across her face, followed by something that looked dangerously close to hurt. For a second, I thought I had lost her forever. "Wow," she said quietly. "I didn't think you'd be the one to say no." "I'm not saying no," I replied, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "I'm saying not like this. You deserve better than a moment you won't fully remember." She looked away, blinking rapidly. I worried she'd laugh it off, or worse, shut down completely. Instead, her shoulders slumped, and she whispered, "I don't trust myself when I'm sober." That confession hit harder than the almost kiss. I took her home that night, made sure she drank water, made sure she was safe. She fell asleep on the couch, exhaustion overtaking everything else. I sat nearby, listening to her slow breathing, wondering if I had just protected something precious, or ruined it. The next morning, she didn't text. Not that day. Not the next. Silence has a way of amplifying doubt. I replayed the moment again and again, questioning myself. Maybe I had misread everything. Maybe she'd feel rejected, embarrassed, exposed. Maybe doing the right thing didn't always feel like the right thing afterward. A week later, she finally asked to meet. She looked different, clearer, quieter, more guarded. We sat across from each other in a small cafe, the air thick with everything unsaid. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and stared into it for a long time before speaking. "I remember what happened," she said. "All of it." My chest tightened. "Okay. I was drunk," she continued. "But I wasn't lying. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush her. I waited." She looked up at me then, eyes steady. "I've been using alcohol to give myself permission to feel things I'm too scared to admit when I'm sober." That night wasn't about courage. It was about escape. Her honesty stunned me. She told me about the pressure she carried, the expectations she felt trapped under, the fear of wanting something real and watching it fall apart. She admitted that she was afraid of losing me more than anything, that if she crossed the line and it went wrong, she wouldn't survive losing the one person who had always stayed. And when you stopped me, she said softly, it hurt, but it also made me feel seen. Like you cared about me, not just the moment. That was when chapter 2 truly began, not with romance, but with accountability. We took things slowly. Painfully slowly at times. We talked more than we touched. We built trust where impulse used to live. She stopped drinking for a while, not because I asked, but because she wanted to learn who she was without numbing herself. I supported her without trying to fix her. Some days were heavy. Some conversations were uncomfortable. Growth rarely looks romantic while it's happening. There were moments of temptation, moments when the old dynamic tried to pull us back into easy closeness without clarity. But every time, we chose honesty over escape. The night she finally kissed me, months later, there was no music, no alcohol, no blurred edges. Just us sitting on her balcony, the city quiet below, both fully present. She leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I have a clear head, she whispered, smiling nervously. I smiled back. I know. That kiss didn't feel urgent. It felt earned. What we built after that wasn't perfect, but it was real. We learned that love isn't proven by how fast you fall, but by how willing you are to wait. That respect can feel like rejection at first, but in the end, it's what makes trust possible. Looking back, I realized that moment outside the party wasn't about restraint. It was about choosing a future over a feeling. About believing that someone is worth waiting for, even if it means standing alone for a while. And sometimes, the strongest kind of love isn't the kiss you take in the dark. But the one you have the courage to delay until the light is clear. The second chapter didn't rush toward romance. It slowed everything down, forced both of us to sit with discomfort instead of hiding behind chemistry. After that cafe conversation, after her confession that alcohol had been her permission slip to feel, we stepped into unfamiliar territory, one where emotions had to stand on their own without being blurred or softened. At first, it was awkward. We were used to easy closeness, inside jokes, unspoken understanding. Now everything felt deliberate. We checked in with each other more. We asked questions instead of assuming answers. Sometimes we laughed about how strange it felt to be so careful, but beneath the humor was something serious. We were relearning each other without escape routes. She struggled more than she admitted at first. There were evenings when she canceled plans, not because she didn't want to see me, but because she didn't trust her own emotional weight. She told me once, her voice barely steady, that sitting with her feeling sober felt louder than any party ever had. I listened, fighting the instinct to reassure her too quickly. I was learning too, that support doesn't mean silencing someone's fear, it means letting them speak it fully. I had my own battles. There were nights I wondered if I had made a mistake, if waiting was just another way of protecting myself from disappointment. Desire doesn't disappear just because you choose patience. It lingers, tests you, asks whether your values are real or just words you like to believe about yourself. I missed her touch. I missed the version of us that felt effortless. But I reminded myself why I'd drawn that line in the first place, because I wanted her choice, not her impulse. What surprised me most was how intimacy showed up anyway. In long walks where she told me about her childhood fears. In quiet dinners where we talked about the lives we were afraid we might never build. In moments when she admitted she was scared I'd eventually lose patience and leave. Each time, I stayed. Not dramatically. Just consistently. One night, she broke down completely. No alcohol. No chaos. Just exhaustion. She cried about how ashamed she felt of needing something to numb her before she felt brave. She cried about how terrifying it was to want me clearly, because clarity meant responsibility. I didn't try to make it better. I held space. I told her that wanting someone sober wasn't weakness, it was courage without armor. That night changed something fundamental. Not because it felt romantic, but because it felt honest. After that, she started reclaiming pieces of herself she'd set aside for years. She found new routines. She laughed differently, less loud, more real. She began to trust that she didn't have to perform or escape to be worthy of affection. Our biggest challenge came when temptation returned, quietly. A familiar setting. A stressful week. Old habits knocking gently, pretending to be comfort. She told me about it instead of hiding it, her voice shaking as she admitted how easy it would be to slip back. That transparency mattered more than perfection ever could. It told me she wasn't just choosing me, she was choosing herself. The moment that sealed everything didn't look like a turning point. We were sitting together on her balcony, talking about nothing important. She reached for my hand without thinking, then paused, searching my face, not for permission, but for honesty. "I'm here," she said softly. Fully. I felt it then, the difference between wanting and choosing. Between heat and clarity. Between a kiss taken and a kiss earned. When she finally leaned in, months after that night outside the party, there was no doubt in her eyes. No rush. No need to escape the moment. Just intention. Just trust. That kiss carried everything we had learned: restraint, respect, patience, truth. And in that stillness, I understood something that changed how I see love forever. The deepest connections aren't built in moments where you lose control, but in the ones where you choose it. Chapter 2 wasn't about waiting for the right time. It was about becoming the right people. Chapter 3 began when waiting was no longer the hard part, living honestly was. After that first clear-headed kiss, something subtle but powerful shifted between us. The tension didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It wasn't about restraint anymore, it was about responsibility. When you choose someone with open eyes, you also choose the weight of what comes next. There's no alcohol to blame, no impulse to hide behind. Just two people standing fully present, aware that what they're building can be broken if handled carelessly. At first, everything felt fragile. Not in a bad way, more like something newly formed, still warm, still setting. We were careful with words, with expectations, with time. She worried constantly that she would disappoint me, that one bad day or one moment of weakness would undo all the progress she'd made. I worried that I would become her anchor in an unhealthy way, that she might lean on me instead of learning to stand on her own. Those fears surfaced during an argument that caught us both off guard. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It started over something small, her canceling plans again because she felt overwhelmed. Old instincts flared in me, the quiet voice that said you're being pushed away. For the first time since we'd begun this careful dance, I didn't hide that fear. "I need to know if this is distance," I said, my voice tight, "or if it's just you needing space." She went quiet. Too quiet. Then she did something that told me how far she'd come. She didn't deflect. She didn't numb herself. She didn't turn it into a joke. "It's fear," she said honestly. "I'm scared that now that this is real, I'll ruin it." That admission opened the door to the hardest conversation we'd had. We talked about emotional labor, about how easy it is to slip into roles: caretaker, rescuer, protector, without realizing it. She admitted she was afraid of leaning on me too much. I admitted I was afraid of being needed only when things were hard. That night, nothing was resolved neatly. But something important happened: we stayed in the discomfort. We didn't rush to reassure. We didn't promise things we couldn't guarantee. We just listened. And then life tested us again. A few weeks later, she ran into friends from her old party circle. The invitation came, casual, familiar, tempting. She told me about it instead of pretending it didn't matter. She said she wasn't sure if she was ready to step into that environment again, sober, clear, exposed. I didn't give advice. I didn't warn her. I just asked, "What do you want to choose for yourself?" She thought about it for a long time. In the end, she went, but she left early. She came back shaken, not because she'd failed, but because she realized how much she'd changed. The things that once helped her escape now felt empty. That realization hurt more than she expected. That night, she cried, not out of shame, but out of grief for the version of herself she was leaving behind. I held her, understanding something important: growth always includes loss. Even when the loss is necessary. From then on, our relationship deepened in quieter ways. We built routines instead of relying on intensity. Morning messages instead of late-night chaos. Check-ins instead of assumptions. We learned how to disagree without threatening the connection. How to pause instead of reacting. How to forgive ourselves for not being finished. The defining moment of Chapter 3 came unexpectedly, on an ordinary evening. We were walking home, hands brushing, the city calm around us. She stopped suddenly and looked at me with a seriousness that made my chest tighten. "I need you to know something," she said. "I don't want you because you saved me. I want you because you respected me, especially when it was inconvenient." Those words stayed with me. Because I realized then that what we had built wasn't based on chemistry alone, or timing, or sacrifice. It was built on choice. Repeated, conscious choice. The kind that doesn't feel dramatic, but lasts. Chapter 3 wasn't about passion returning. It was about trust settling in. About two people learning that love isn't proven in moments of temptation, but in the quiet, consistent decision to show up with clarity, even when it's harder than giving in. And in that clarity, we didn't just find each other. We found ourselves. Chapter 4 arrived quietly, without ceremony, the way real turning points often do. There was no dramatic announcement, no single moment we could point to and say, "This is where everything changed." Instead, it unfolded through ordinary days that slowly became meaningful because of how we lived them. By then, sobriety was no longer something she talked about constantly. It had stopped being the center of her identity and had become part of her foundation. Some days were still hard. There were mornings when she woke up heavy, when old anxieties crept back in and whispered that life used to be easier when she didn't feel everything so clearly. But now, instead of running from those feelings, she faced them. And I watched, quietly proud, as she chose honesty again and again, even when it made her vulnerable. I was changing too. Being with her forced me to confront my own habits of emotional distance. I had always believed I was patient, respectful, grounded. But loving her showed me the difference between avoiding harm and actively choosing care. I learned how easy it is to hide behind restraint instead of risking closeness. How tempting it is to stay safe rather than be seen. One evening, after a long day that had worn us both down, we finally collided. Not gently this time. We argued about the future, about timing, expectations, fears we hadn't fully named yet. She worried about becoming dependent. I worried about becoming secondary to her healing journey. The words were sharper than before, the silence afterward heavier. For a moment, I wondered if this was where we broke. But something had changed since the early days. Neither of us reached for an escape. No shutting down. No numbing. No pretending it didn't matter. After hours apart, she came back and sat across from me, eyes tired but clear. "I don't want to lose this," she said. "But I don't want to lose myself either." That honesty stripped the tension of its power. I realized then that love doesn't require choosing between closeness and independence. It asks for balance, renegotiated again and again. I told her I wasn't asking to be her center, only her partner. Someone who walks beside her, not in front of her, not behind. That conversation didn't solve everything. But it set a tone. From that point on, we talked about the future not as a fantasy, but as a shared responsibility. We spoke about boundaries, about space, about what support actually looks like when both people are still growing. The moment that defined Chapter 4 came weeks later, in the most unromantic setting imaginable. We were at a small gathering, nothing wild, nothing dangerous. Someone offered her a drink casually, without knowing her story. She didn't freeze. She didn't look at me for reassurance. She simply smiled and said, "No thanks." Later, as we walked home, she squeezed my hand and said softly, "I didn't even feel tempted." That was when I understood, the kiss she had once tried to give me while drunk wasn't really about desire. It had been about escape, about borrowing courage. What we had now was different. It wasn't fueled by urgency or fear of missing out. It was steady. Chosen. Real. When intimacy deepened after that, it wasn't explosive, it was grounding. It felt like trust settling into the body. Like two people meeting each other without masks, without shortcuts. There was no confusion afterward, no regret, no wondering what it meant. We both knew. Chapter 4 taught me something I never learned from passion or heartbreak alone. Love isn't proven by how strongly you feel in the moment, but by how clearly you choose when feeling strongly would be easier. That night, as we lay together in silence, she rested her head on my chest and whispered, "Thank you for waiting." I realized then that I hadn't been waiting for her to be ready. I had been waiting for us to be honest enough to begin.